This is Brian Osborne, President of the St. Tammany Federation of Teachers and School Employees. This President's Report will focus on collective bargaining and specifically the Bus Owner-Operator MOU you may have heard about. So the essential question we'll explore here is, why did the union reject the MOU offered by management regarding bus owner-operators? So a bit of backstory. I was at the central office on a matter unrelated to collective bargaining, and I was asked to return to talk about a time-sensitive matter. This is on Thursday. I received this proposal ostensibly to help owner-operators, and it was basically lifting the $100 operational stipend from $100 a month to $300 a month, a $200 increase per month. And it would sunset, well, it would go from February until May, and then it would sunset. There was also an additional provision where bus owner-operators and bus operators would get $20 for any morning coverage that they did and $20 for any afternoon coverage that they did, for a maximum of $40 per day. The total package was estimated to be worth $610,417.50. I told the negotiators I would bring it back to my team and get back to them. They emailed over the MOU language, which you saw on the previous slide. And this was the message: that it had to be done by 4:30 p.m. today so that it could be posted on the agenda for the February 3rd meeting. After consulting with members of the union's Bus Owner-Operator Committee, we came up with a counter proposal that we felt was fair, considering everything owner-operators have been through and the crisis facing transportation and facing individual drivers who are having to choose what repairs to make, what bills to pay, just to keep their buses rolling. So our counter proposal was to raise the $100 stipend, operational stipend, by $579 per month for a total of $679. We wanted this for the entire fiscal year, and we wanted it to be retroactive. There was internal debate about the coverage, whether or not a stipend should be offered, since not everyone does coverage, and some felt it should just be done out of a sense of duty and maybe just roll that money into the stipend, which benefits everybody. I decided to keep it, given that some did think it was popular, but also several board members had that idea of offering a coverage stipend, and I wanted to honor some of those ideas because I have seen the frustration in the board to get something done, and I do think they are a major stakeholder, and their ideas should also be considered. The total cost was about $2.8 million. We took management's proposal and proportionally increased it to arrive at that figure. And then began a back and forth. I'm trained to be a negotiator. That involves negotiation, a back and forth, a willingness to operate in good faith and to arrive at a compromise. The goal, though, was to have a stopgap that would actually stop the bleeding. Knowing that we're going to have the financial reopener where we can fix bus owner operator operational pay once and for all. But as was indicated in the last meeting and meetings previous, folks need help now. They needed help yesterday. We've been talking about these issues for more than a year. So I won't read all of these. If you want to stop the tape or the video and read over these things. But basically here, I'm giving my rationale for why I feel that our offer is more than fair. I reference House Bill 364, which the lobbyist for the school board and the Louisiana Superintendents Association worked to kill. This would have updated the state operational pay, which hasn't been updated since 1986, so you can imagine the inflationary costs that have risen over that time. I also referenced the fact that we're swimming in ESSER money, and we need to repurpose that to shore up transportation, as it's a key component to in-person instruction. Teachers can't teach kids that are not in front of them, effectively anyway. We all know teaching through the computer is not what it's cracked up to be. Now, this was the response to the counter proposal that we offered and the rationale. And I will read this one. The offer from this board is to get our bus drivers operational relief until negotiations. I feel that after listening to the drivers and hearing from them that this is a fair offer. In negotiations, there will be the opportunity to address the House bill, the operational formulas, and what can be addressed moving forward. As the superintendent, I stand by this fair offer of assistance, and I hope the Federation will agree. The agenda goes out tomorrow, and I hope that this MOU will be on it. But if not, I totally understand. Sincerely, Frank J. Jabbia, Superintendent. Okay, so a lot to unpack here. On Tuesday of that week, January 25th, Superintendent Jabbia met with several bus owner-operators. I requested to be at that meeting, and two of the owner-operators told me that Superintendent Jabbia didn't want me there. And I will talk about that later, why that's a problem. And after reading this, I decided I am a representative after all. I couldn't understand why he wasn't willing to negotiate, but I wanted to get feedback from the folks that he had indeed spoken to. And here I'm trying to keep the channels of communication open while I waited to hear back from the owner-operators. Because of the time pressure involved and the fact that Superintendent Jabbia had a commitment in Slidell the next day, I told him to have 2 copies of it ready, just in case the owner-operator group wanted me to sign off on it. Now the question, actually it was 2 questions that I sent out to the owner-operator group, those individuals who had met face-to-face with Superintendent Jabbia. Was each of you attended the meeting with Superintendent Jabby on Tuesday, January 25th? Based upon your conversation, do you think the superintendent's offer is a fair one? Explain. And then second, do you recommend that the Federation accept the MOU as is? And again, if you want to pause and look at the comments here, you'll see that specific numbers were talked about. One person talked about a substantial increase of $300 to $700 and something permanent. $200 more is not much after taxes, and I believe the owner-operators will think it is insulting when we are so far in the hole. And this person recommended that the Federation not accept and to continue to negotiate. Another, the offer is not fair. We specifically talked about the excessive costs that owner-operators are seeing now and how using the 1986 operations table has resulted in the school board's inability to retain owner-operators. We also talked about the inadequacy of the monthly fuel adjustment being short because the actual increases are rounded off and not carried forward. The group also indicated that the most important issue was lack of operations, and the group agreed that operations money was more important than coverage stipends. The proposal is short of what Mr. Jabbia suggested as a $500 to $700 permanent increase in the stipend. The increase of $300 a month for 5 months is not enough. I do not feel that this is an adequate temporary solution. I do not recommend that the union accept this. I'm pretty unequivocal on this one. In fact, the $200 a month increase is a flat-out insult. And another, no, it's not fair. This is not what we talked about in our meeting with Frank. He spoke of $500 to $700, something substantial. This proposal has Pete all over it. Come on, Frank, you told us you really understood. This is an insult to us as owner-operators who have been put on the back burner for years and years. And it's a no vote for this individual. No, I do not agree with this compensation. Our conversation reflected significantly more funds based upon making a difference for owner-operators. This, while being a nice gesture, does not make enough of a difference to complement our needs. A simple oil change is $450 to $500 at this time, and after taxes, $300 is absolutely not enough. No, I'm not for the MOU. I do not accept. This is not the number we talked about. So with my own deep reservations about the deal and my belief that it really was insulting, considering the testimony given, the depth of knowledge about the problem provided, the violation of the contract by attempting to directly negotiate with employees. All of that coupled with a unanimous no vote on the part of a group of owner-operators who are veterans, who know the business inside and out, who are doing this not just for themselves because they'll be likely retiring soon, but for the ones they're leaving behind. So they, at this point in their career, are being advocates knowing that owner-operators are critical to this system. So I did respond, telling him to read over the statements and asking him or providing him with ways to continue the negotiation. Basically compared his offer to being like giving a person a small fire extinguisher when you're facing a 5-alarm fire. I just didn't think it was a meaningful enough attempt to shore up transportation when the problems we face all stem from shortages. And yes, COVID is a part of this, but a lot of these shortages are just people leaving the profession because they simply cannot afford to keep their bus on the road. And this system talks about owning a fleet one day, but there's no infrastructure in place, there's no plan, and they simply can't afford that many buses. So, again, this was always intended to just be a stopgap, but with so much funding, it's just incomprehensible to me that this is the number they came up with. So his response was that this was extremely disappointing, but it's completely my decision, and I will own the decision. Ultimately I have the authority. I could have signed off on this. As much as I respect my owner-operators, I could have made that decision because inevitably some people will have that philosophy of something is better than nothing. But when you're in a full-blown crisis and you believe the board will see management shortcomings here, I just have to have faith that things will improve. So again, I take full ownership of the decision not to accept this MOU. But he's saying here, this is it. There will be no stopgap. That just focus on the financial reopener in the spring. And I'm going to go ahead and read this, my response to him. Extremely disappointing is an understatement on our end. These folks have poured their hearts out for months and laid out the problems they face for the board. The entire community is aware of these problems as service has declined. You've got employees telling you they're having to pick and choose what maintenance issues to address. All that, and your negotiators came back with an insufficient proposal and were unwilling to consider the Federation's counteroffer. I've mentioned the playbook that is being run. It is not a good faith playbook. All parties should remain objective and understand these methods are part of the reason our district is declining. You met with several bus owner-operators on Tuesday, January 25th. I was informed by two of them that you stated you did not want me at the meeting. I am the sole collective bargaining representative for St. Tammany Parish School Board employees. You specifically discussed adding $500 to $700 to the current $100 operational stipend. Discussing such matters with them is a union-busting tactic called captive audience. The Federation also views it as a contract violation. All that being said, we need a solution. You stated that the owner-operators thought it was a fair offer. I sent you proof that's not the case, and they actually feel angry and insulted. Your lowball offer of adding $200 to the $100 stipend is $300 less than the low end of the spectrum you mentioned during the meeting. Not only that, it was only for 4 months and not retro. They also had the impression it would be permanent. My offer was $679 retroactive. That breaks down to $100 plus the proposed $579 increase. $579 is only $79 above the $500 to $700 range you gave the owner-operators. We feel that's a fair offer. The Federation prefers collaborative negotiating. We reject zero-sum bad faith negotiating. The term bargaining implies that it is a back and forth to reach a compromise. This was decidedly not the case. So a little bit of background here, because since I started this job in June, and really even before that, I've heard so many conflicting things about collective bargaining, so much distortion and confusion. I feel like we need to set the record straight. Basically, collective bargaining is the process wherein workers, through their union, negotiate over wages, benefits, and working conditions. Featured in the low left corner is the current CBA, or collective bargaining agreement, between the St. Tammany Federation of Teachers and School Employees and the St. Tammany Parish School Board. A lot of people often confuse the board for management being run by the superintendent. We have to remember, though, the most important group in that pyramid is the school board. These are the elected officials whose task is to run a school system that provides a high-quality education for the children of this great parish. They are the policymakers. Management is intended to be the ones who execute the policy. Now, typically, in a collective bargaining scenario or situation, the union would bargain directly with management. I'm pushing for a different model because what I see is a school board that's increasingly frustrated by the way that management presents the concept of collective bargaining. I see a group that's talented, full of ideas, and a sense of urgency on the part of the board, but I see a management group that stalls and stalls and stalls and promises that things will be dealt with in collective bargaining rather than dealing with them in a timely fashion. So, in order for any of this to work, for collective bargaining to work, for the contract to be valid and enforced, there has to be a good faith effort on the part of all parties. And there are some specific meanings to that concept of good faith as it pertains to collective bargaining. But you can also just think of it simply as when you operate in good faith, you're demonstrating honesty or sincerity of intention. Bad faith can be understood as the opposite state, and you usually have to look for patterns of identifiable behaviors, and there's a list there of some of them that I have experienced. Intimidation, I'd add that to that list, or attempted intimidation. One that's on there, bullwarism, is one that applies to this particular scenario and others that I've faced in trying to negotiate with management. And that's basically a take it or leave it philosophy. So that's what I encountered with this particular MOU. Despite the effort we put into getting feedback and crafting a counter proposal that we felt would do the job but wasn't going to be something the system couldn't handle financially, all we got back was take it or leave it. Time pressure, artificial deadlines, and the notion that the owner-operators thought it was a fair deal, and, the union was the one standing in the way. So all of these are bad faith moves, and I call that the status quo playbook because these plays have been run for a very, very long time. And in one form or another, they're used to neutralize the union, but also the school board. So I want to talk about the way that collective bargaining is a flexible tool. So in Section 902, Complete Understanding, there's the statement, this agreement represents the complete agreement of the parties and may be amended, altered, or temporarily suspended only upon the written consent of both parties. All right, so this is where the concept of the MOU comes in, Memorandum of Understanding. So neither side can unilaterally say we're going to change the agreement. And that's why it involves a negotiation. But time and again, management doesn't want to negotiate. They just expect a signature on what they believe is best for employees. And that is not the nature of collective bargaining, whether you're talking about a full session, such as in the upcoming financial reopener, or full bargaining at the end of a given contract period. So in Article 17, negotiations, they mention mutually scheduled negotiations, and you have the reopener language down at the bottom, which I did want to point out. It says the Federation shall have the right to reopen negotiations on salaries for the 2022, 2023, and 2023-2024 school years. That second line, the parties agree to reopen all collective bargaining agreements for renegotiation of salaries in good faith, not later than spring 2022. So in the first line, the union has the unilateral right to open negotiations. But somehow in that second line, management interprets that as they have the unilateral right to dictate exactly when negotiations occur. Now, they can't drag it out forever because it's not later than spring. But first we heard February, now we're hearing March. But I want to go on record saying that I have on multiple occasions asked them to go ahead and open negotiations so we could just handle all of these things. They have refused to do so, but at the same time, we could have made use of the time to kind of handle things like a stopgap for bus owner operator pay. So you can do both, despite what you've heard in the meetings. And like I've said in the meetings, there is no Louisiana statute on how collective bargaining is to be done. This is obviously a new era. So I am pushing for bargaining to be done in open meetings so that all of these tactics, these bad faith plays, can be removed from the equation. Because that kind of stuff doesn't work in the light of day. The goal would just be to negotiate, collaborate, problem solve, deal with these issues using the vast resources this system possesses. I don't think that's too much to ask.
Help and your understanding.
It's a relevant
I think Mr.
clip
Provost
from August
or
20th,
Mr.
2022.
Either one, they've received numerous calls.
Yeah, both of
Because
us
we
have.
had a meeting with them before we met with you, before we came, and they can attest that, the bus drivers are hurting. We need help. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank y'all. Mr. Jabby, I think.
Yeah, just for the board's clarification, this is not in support or against, I just want to clarify, so, I'm not sure the board understands the different type of, this was really a local fuel adjustment that was done right after Katrina, when the prices of gasoline and diesel skyrocketed, and so the board agreed to supplement the price of fuel at that time. The superintendent at that time also gave an additional $100 per month, actually for 12 months, which is $1,200, plus the operational pay is based on that chart from the state. It's based on your mileage and the size of your bus and all of that, okay? And I wanted to tell y'all that, and I don't know if the board knows this, but for anything like this, we need to go through the collective bargaining process. And I've already talked to Ms. Green. We're about to go through that as soon as we can get the budget done and see what we have, and that's on our agenda to discuss, okay?
Excuse me, we're not asking for, we know it's coming up for collective bargaining.
Okay.
We wanted something now to help because you've got school starting in a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 weeks, and you got bus drivers that needs tires.
But technically, Mr. Yates, the board cannot do this because we're under the federation that has to go through that process.
Okay.
And I'm not saying we can't tackle that sooner before we do everything else, but I'm saying we're gonna need to do that step first. Because the board does not have the right to, that's the reason not the reason we went to collective bargaining, but one of the things through the collective bargaining process is we bargain for salary and benefits. And then we bring that to the board for them to approve. But it has to go through that bargaining process first before we can bring it to the board.
Even a one-time stipend.
Because that's salary. That's money.
Well, we're asking for an operational stipend, not a salary.
Still the same. It's money. It's money. I'm not trying to
Okay,
put a
okay.
damper on what you're doing here. I'm just telling you that's what the process is. And I promise you, we're gonna cover it. I'll get with Ms. Green as soon as possible to look at this. And then we can come back to the board and they can vote on it. Okay?
Okay.
We hadn't forgot about you.
All
We
right.
appreciate what you do.
Thank
you.
Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
So in that previous clip, you heard then interim Superintendent Jabia say that that stipend, operational stipend that they were seeking would be taken care of in collective bargaining. So they asked for that in August, and they were desperate because once again, people were pushing repairs and tire replacements because the operational pay had been taken, the local operational pay had been taken, during the pandemic shutdown. So we signed off, the union signed off December the 20th. There was an interim president, if you recall, and we did have Superintendent Jabia at that point, but Associate Superintendent Pete Jabia was still chief negotiator, and he handled all that stuff. But I will tell you, I was on the negotiating team. Despite my best efforts, nothing was done, despite that promise that it would be handled in collective bargaining. Nothing was done specifically for owner-operators. Looking back, that we had proposed $1,000 one-time stipend to help with their maintenance costs. Roughly, that would have been about $330,000, a minimal cost, and they couldn't see their way to giving that up, despite the promise in an open meeting. Okay, so this is an example of Section 902 collective bargaining. Again, memorandums of understanding can be crafted at any time as long as both parties agree. Now, there was an irregularity here on the side of management. And so this is around that time I was attacked in the open meeting by Pete Jabbia. And I was told I was breaking every rule relative to collective bargaining. And then they advance a stipend that I had not approved. So as you saw in the video, any compensation, whether it's perpetual or one time, it does have to be signed off by the Federation. And so I denied that stipend so that we could talk about some issues and ways to help employees in the short term. And so after negotiation, a COVID stipend for all employees, $1,000, came out of that. We could not come to an agreement about COVID days. They wanted to add a vaccine incentive, and I just felt that would be divisive. So that came off the table because they refused to yield on that. And the two stipends to go into effect. Now, all of this, and I know, look, we got backlash on this deal, but the way I sold it was, this is not the financial reopener. This is just something to tide people over. And the stipend was minimal that management needed for basically the high school teacher at each building that was going to track service hours. So we're not trying to obstruct, but all right. So if we're going to do these, this was the midday run. Let's try to get the most value for our employees. There was an article in the paper called "Slogging Through Bus Driver Shortage: St. Tammany OK's Pay Increase to Some Drivers," and there was a passage that bothered me. It said, because the pay raise only impacts a small amount of runs and money, the school board was able to approve it at a regular meeting, said Meredith Mendez, a spokesperson for the district. A raise for all drivers would have to be handled during collective bargaining between the district and employees, which takes place in the spring. So one problem I have is you don't see the union mentioned in any of that. This was the result of a negotiation. It wasn't much of one. Again, we tried to get some operational proposals. The negotiators didn't want to hear it. They did make an adjustment per our recommendation. It didn't change the total cost, but it did incentivize the one-way runs. So that's a problem. And the district does not negotiate directly with the employees. The union is the collective bargaining agent. Now, certainly, we will get input from all bargaining units when we tackle full bargaining, or if we're looking at a particular MOU to handle small issues, but we are the bargaining agents. Anything else, any kind of attempt on the part of management to directly bargain with employees is a violation of the contract. This concept that because it was only a small amount, it could be approved in a regular meeting. Well, that, defies logic because they approved a COVID stipend for all employees through the same process. So it's this kind of misinformation that muddies the waters when it comes to collective bargaining. And it turns it into this either kind of red tape, this confusing mess, this muddle, or a vessel for empty promises. Collective bargaining is a hard-won right. It is not guaranteed in the state of Louisiana. So if it's so dysfunctional, why do so many people fight for it? Well, we just have to fix it. Again, this is a new era. There's new leadership. We have to find a way to work together in good faith for the good of our employees, and ultimately that will impact our children.
Yeah. Last week I mentioned the HCR 20 report.
This is me back when I was a
bus
teacher.
owner-operator compensation.
I was a happier man then,
operational pay, which hasn't
full of
been
hope and
updated in
optimism.
35 years.
And I was speaking to the
I did
board
email
about House
that
Bill
report to each of you, along
364.
with a link to House Bill
This was
364.
that legislation
That was
was gonna
filed on
help
March 31st by Representative
owner-operators.
Melinda White. I'm currently conducting a study to gather data from St. Tammany bus owner operators to get their input. I will share this data with the board, Mr. Bodie, and Superintendent Jabia, in the hopes that we can raise awareness about the need for positive action on the part of the state. The legislative session begins Monday, and this really could be a godsend to this district and other districts with owner operators.
And over the summer, that House bill was defeated. It had a good head of steam until it hit finance, where it was voted down. Now, our owner operators are very savvy, well organized, and they, to put it nicely, reached out to the folks who voted no. In particular, Senator Patrick McMath, who represents St. Tammany. St. Tammany has the largest number of owner-operators in the state. They wanted to know why. His response was, "Thank you for reaching out to our office, and I apologize for letting you down. I wanted to share with you how I came to the decision on my vote. Several board members and the superintendent were against this bill. It is considered an unfunded mandate and would have cost St. Tammany Parish School Board $3.4 million. While it is too late for this session, I am willing to author and carry this bill in future sessions if everyone can come to an agreement on where the $3 million would come from." Thank you, Senator McMath. So, my problem there is that this bill was the product of a study. On that study was George Bodie, who's the Director of Transportation, St. Tammany Parish. It wasn't a perfect study, but I felt for a layperson, gave a good understanding of everything that goes into maintaining a bus. The bill itself was flawed, but it still would have helped tremendously because, again, the state operational table hasn't been updated since 1986, and all of that state money is tax-free. Anything that we try to do at the local level in terms of operational is going to be taxed, and so it ends up costing more if you try to get the same bang for your buck. So my problem is, if they thought it would cost $3.4 million based on a bill that came from a study that their own director of transportation was a part of, then that means they were okay with passing that unfunded mandate on to owner-operators. which would be about $10,000 a piece. And that's the quicksand that they're in, the operational quicksand. Some of it's luck, some of it's where you are in your career, whether you have a bus note or not. But everyone has had to deal with the explosive price of inflation, even with fuel stabilizing. The damage was done early. Oil is super expensive. Parts are through the roof. And so here we are, passing that unfunded mandate on to the owner-operators who are having to dip into their own salary to do their jobs. It's unacceptable. Now, before that bill was defeated, I believe this was back in February of last year, last school year. Superintendent Jabbia pushed through his reorganization plan. And tied into that plan were the 2,000 in stipends. They threw some COVID days in there. All of it tied together with the ambitious. And this is from an article. I won't read the whole thing, but again, feel free to stop the video and check it out. But I did want to read this quote. "The people in the trenches deserve everything we can give them," Jabbia said. "We've asked our employees to do more this year because of COVID than we've ever asked of them before. Same thing with our supervisors. We have to reward the people who are willing to get that extra degree, to go that extra mile, that want to see this entire system ascend." Now, I mean, he's entitled to his vision, but that shows priorities to me. His biggest move was to benefit management, who got all of the steps and stipends of employees, but then a 5% raise on top of that. And the cost of that 5% for management was $2 million for a group that's smaller than the owner-operators. Quite a bit smaller than the owner-operators. And I'm not aware that there's a management shortage. It seems like there's a surplus of candidates, certainly compared to the bus owner-operators. So, again, that was a $2 million deal. The deal that they offered the owner-operators to try to shore them up until we can get a permanent fix on operational was $610,000. For transportation, a critical department where poorly maintained buses, because people can't afford to maintain them appropriately, inevitably is going to cause more breakdowns and safety issues than if these folks were made whole. Something to point out here, the reorganization plan's breadth impressed many board members, but admittedly caught some by surprise. Several noted they had only received an overview 2 days earlier and wanted more time to get public feedback from constituents before voting. And I will talk about that policy in a moment, but think about that. It says Jabbia pressed the issue, saying it was imperative to put the process in motion as soon as possible. So when it came to this management restructure, which didn't really fully kick in until this school year, there was a tremendous sense of urgency. And yet with transportation, even before I made my first speech as president, we've been pushing these issues that operational pay needed to change. So again, it's about priorities. I will say that this was one of the more interesting board meetings that I've ever been a part of. As it mentions, the debate stretched on. The total meeting hit the 4-hour mark, I believe. And I just want to read part of this. A visibly frustrated Jabbia said the debate was sending the wrong message to school employees. Patricia Craddock, acting president of the St. Tammany Federation of Teachers and School Employees, already offered the union's full support earlier in the evening, and Jabbia, a former teacher and school principal, said he knew the importance of establishing incentives for employees to rise through the system. He said the move was essential to regaining the level of success achieved in previous decades, while the St. Tammany district was annually ranked among the 2 or 3 best in the state. St. Tammany ranked 18th in the latest school district performance scores released in 2019. So, I just have a problem with, ultimately the superintendent is an employee, and telling an elected body that vigorous debate in a democratic forum is sending the wrong message to school employees. I mean, that bothers me. It also bothers me that basically a product of collective bargaining, an MOU involving 2,000 in stipends and 10 COVID days was meshed with this plan, this management plan. Those two things should have never gone together. They should have been voted on separately. And I just think it points to the way the old union was. Based on what I've experienced, where you go in and they just want you to sign, I mean, that's not bargaining, and that's not what a union does. And so, it's not about steamrolling people, but it is about collaboration and having the voices of employees represented. And I think if this system is going to rise, we have got to invest in our employees who are committed to the roles they are in, the ones in the trenches, the ones in the classrooms, the ones in transportation, the ones feeding our kids, keeping our schools clean and maintained, making sure the endless flow of paperwork is organized. No problem with advancement, but we also have to invest in folks who want to make a career out of what they're doing. You shouldn't have to go up to feel like you're not stuck in a dead-end job. So, again, it's about vision and priorities, and I just have to thoroughly disagree. I don't think increasing the size of management and compensation is what is going to get us to the top. So here you have School Board Policy BD. Under policy adoption, for a policy to be adopted by the school board, it must receive a simple majority of school board members present and voting. A policy recommended to the school board shall be introduced at one meeting and officially adopted at the next meeting unless the school board votes otherwise. This practice provides school board members time to study the proposed policy and to give interested parties an opportunity to respond. And so, with the management plan, so they're telling me on the one hand, I've got to get this signed so they can get it on the agenda by Friday at noon. But this particular ambitious proposal involving a lot of money was not even taken through committee as a whole and was given to school board members 2 days in advance, and they were told not to talk about it. It doesn't sit well with me. But it does tell me that it is possible to get something done on another MOU. Just because we missed that Friday deadline, we could, get something done and take it to the full meeting. As long as the school board votes that it's okay, then it's fine. So I just reject this kind of take it or leave it mentality, false deadlines, time pressure. Let's get it right. So on a lighter note, a little connection here that the reporter who covered the story about the management restructure, Andy Canulet, his son is one of my favorite students of all time. He liked to say a couple of things that I took to heart, and I realize are part of my approach to this job as a labor leader. He always liked to say, you got to risk it for the biscuit. I do think you have to come out of your comfort zone. I do think you have to take risks, especially in an environment that's so resistant to change and progress. He also liked to say sunlight makes the best disinfectant. And that's why I've pushed for open meetings bargaining. I think transparency is paramount, particularly since these are public funds we deal in, and these are public schools. I just think transparency is something that taxpayers deserve, and it's one that will lead to better outcomes for all. And the third one is just something I've always appreciated: trust but verify. I've had to do a whole lot of that since I took this job, and hopefully we'll get to a better day when all three entities, the board, management, and the federation, can work in conjunction. There's always going to be tension, and there should be. Without tension, you can't have accountability. You can't have growth. And so it's a balance. It's always going to be a balance. We're not in this to be friends, but we do have to strive for a good working relationship.
I do know that, and I think it's good. I just think that when I talk to them about the maintenance and the costs and the expense, and then I think about what would we do without them, just like kids showing up late, I can imagine teaching a class, and you know what I mean? Like, they're important. And so,
Yeah, we're going to address operational during the collective bargaining process.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Mr. Durham?
I think one of the major problems we had was, the COVID with our bus drivers and having to cover so many routes that were having to be covered because of their illness. So, that's just a domino effect, and it's unpredictable as to when and where it's going to happen. And then you throw in the storm and the debris on the roads and everything else. It's just a monumental mess. Out there dealing with all of these different components. I do understand, from the bus driver standpoint that we're asking a lot of them to do something extra. And like we did with some of the custodial people and our maintenance people during this time, maybe we could look at an option to give them some additional compensation to at least acknowledge in these trying times. I'm not saying in their regular route runnings and all of that, but I'm just saying in this extraordinary, difficult time to find something to say we appreciate what you're doing. Because, my God, I go home in my truck on 190 right here, and it's an hour, and I live 2 miles from here. So, I can imagine driving one of those yellow buses trying to get through traffic, because everybody thinks, well, good, they're going to block it so I can get in front of them. So they cut in front. But I do ramble, but I know it's a difficult scenario. But there's some people that go way above and beyond to help. And we need to figure out a way that's better than, I don't know, whatever the rate is, $1 a mile or $10 a mile. I don't even know what the rate is, but whatever it is their help is more than that. It's worth more than a couple of bucks. So I'm just saying, if we can figure out a way to say, we appreciate you, then let's try and get our heads together and try and do something a little bit better for these people, because they are stressed out, because like I said, drive on any highway, it's stressful. So, and I certainly appreciate everything everybody's doing, because transportation department is the one having to reroute all these people. And half these bus drivers don't even know the other route, because they're covering for somebody that they don't even drive that area. So it's a real monumental task for everybody. So I appreciate everybody. I'm just saying, if there's anything that we can do from a board perspective that's outside of collective bargaining, that is not really collective bargaining, but I guess everything's inside of collective bargaining is what we've been told. So let's just try to figure it out. That's all. Thanks.
So in that previous video clip, see a few things, once again, the promise that things will be taken care of in collective bargaining. You see urgency on the part of Tammy Lamy and also Mr. Durman. And his remarks at the end are pretty telling. There seems to be confusion about what collective bargaining is, when it can be used. So again, a big part of what I'm trying to establish is that we need a hard reset. We need to be honest and willing to work together, because again, there's no statute telling us how to do bargaining, and it's not in the contract. So management, the board, and the federation hopefully are going to get this worked out soon, especially with the financial reopener looming. A couple things financially before I go. There is no reason that management couldn't fund the union's counteroffer. You have the ESSER funds in abundance. Miguel Cardona, the U.S. Secretary of Education, said that's what these funds are for, to prioritize in-person instruction. And again, transportation makes that possible. This is a frequently asked questions regarding whether or not ESSER funds can be used for transportation. Yes, they can. And the follow-up question is, can the funds be used to address a shortage of school bus drivers due to the pandemic? Again, the answer is yes. And this could come in the form of hiring or retention bonuses. Just want to point out that in the pandemic year, lots of money was saved because we shut schools down. But transportation saved $2.93 million. That's more than the proposal, the counteroffer that the union gave to the to management's bus owner operator MOU. And in 2020, 2021, we somehow saved $3.9 million in transportation. And the 2021-2022 budget, the total fund balance was $134.9 million. $114 million of that amount is slated as local priorities. This includes salaries, and certainly that's a substantial sum of money that could have been used to fund the MOU. And here's a throwback. In the special fund, you'll find the BP Oil Spill Settlement Fund. Print's kind of small there, but I believe it's about $12 million in that particular fund. So if that's a rainy day, this has been a torrential downpour for quite a while now. I do want to point out Article 18 of the collective bargaining agreement, the no strikes, no lockouts clause. Several times throughout this school year, I've worked with the veteran owner-operators to prevent work stoppage. Even if this clause did not exist, as a labor leader over public schools, I am against work stoppage. So please, as frustrating and as angry as you might be, please have faith that something can be done, that we can get rid of the bad faith bargaining techniques that have been used against us, and to actually sit down with the board and management directly and find solutions. Now, when it says strikes, it means any kind of work stoppage. That would include sick outs, any way that things slow down are made to slow down. It's just simply something we cannot condone, both contractually, but also appealing to you on a personal level. Consider the damage to families and how they would feel if their children couldn't go to school. I do hope all of our efforts are being heard by the public and that they will pressure those in power. And that's what this boils down to. They have the power to make this right. They're choosing not to use the power. Just trust that the meeting on February 3rd could be another opportunity to speak out and to make management reconsider its tactics, which are damaging to morale and operations as a whole. I did want to point out that last paragraph. It says, on recommendation of the superintendent, the board may authorize release time for any employee or employees for the purpose of lobbying the legislature or other public officials with regard to issues deemed by the board to be in the best interest of the St. Tammany Parish school system. Such release time will be without loss of pay or benefits and will not be considered as a violation of this no strike clause. So I just hope the next time around this summer, when there is a bill that will help owner-operators, that instead of lobbying against such a bill, that the superintendent and his lobbyist push for the change that we need. I made several agenda requests before the Friday noon deadline. They were all turned down, but I did notice on the agenda that they would like to discuss collective bargaining strategy with the Federation. I do think we can make some progress there. Move toward good faith bargaining again and away from bad faith bargaining, and also to get something done for the bus owner operators before we officially hit the table with the financial reopener. We hope that everyone will attend. We need unity among our bargaining units. One of the items was COVID days, which they refused to put on there. So we really need folks to come out and speak. We tried to make a move that we hoped would inspire the school board. They may need some specific data and specific testimony to move the needle. So please consider coming out February the 3rd. If you'd like to speak before the first meeting, you need to be there by 5:45. You can also sign up to speak between the two meetings. Thank you, and I appreciate you if you hung in this long. I know it's a lot of information. I stayed up all night getting this together, but it's important, and I wanted people to be informed, to understand why we do the things we do and where we're going. Thank you.